Have you ever found yourself wishing for a fresh start? Like a do-over, an opportunity to wipe the slate clean, clear away the rubble, and just rebuild? Maybe it's because you've made some dumb financial decisions. Maybe you're just moving to a new school district. Or maybe you'd like a fresh start when it comes to your physical health. Maybe you're leaving a job because they're making you, or because you're choosing to, but either way it didn't end well. Or perhaps it's a relationship that's been terminated. She decided she was done with you, or he simply couldn't get past what happened. Whether it was you or it was them, for whatever reason, the relationship's just gone belly up. I mean, I think we all at various times in our lives long for some kind of fresh start. I mean, one thing we all have in common is that we've lived through this global pandemic. And depending on where you live in the world right now, things, for the most part, maybe feel like they're getting back to normal. And most of us, I would guess, have begun some kind of rebuild of our lives. But before we jump at that opportunity, whatever that looks like for you, before we figure out the fresh start or the do-over or the rebuild mentality, it's worthwhile for us to pause and reflect. I know it's worthwhile to pause because I often want to not pause, skip the pause. I mean, one of the greatest sources of tension in my friendships, my relationships, especially in my marriage, is that I have this tendency to try to rush towards solutions. I'm a fix-it guy. I mean, the amount of times that my wife Alana has come home from work and started sharing about her day, the good, the hard, the frustrations, the amount of times that she does so and I immediately respond with solutions, it's comical. I mean, I say it's comical because I should know better by now, but it's so ingrained in me. When something breaks, you fix it. When something's wrong, you try to make it right. And when something's broken down or is torn apart or it's crumbling at the edges, the answer, of course, is to reason out how to rebuild it, to demand a do-over, to figure out a fresh start. And believe me when I say, I want that for you. Whatever the reason for your fresh start is, I want this for you. But if failed New Year's resolution stats tell us anything, it's that it's hard to make a fresh start stick. It's hard, but it's not impossible. And to help us with this, we're going to look at some ancient wisdom from the memoir of a man named Nehemiah. Now, Nehemiah lived during the mid-5th century BCE, and he lived during the reign of the Persian Empire. Here's how he starts his memoir. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah. In the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men. And I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile. And also, I questioned them about Jerusalem. Now, just to give you a little bit of historical context here, Nehemiah's people, the people of Judah, was one of the tribes of Israel. And they had been at war with some of the major world powers of the day for quite some time. And eventually they were defeated and captured by the Babylonian Empire, and a bunch of them were carried off as prisoners of war to Babylon. And then the Babylonians were defeated by the Persians, who set up their own empire. Now, in all of the melee, some of the Israelites got to return to Judah, but most were carried off or shipped out to some other place in the empire. Nehemiah was one of those shipped out captives, and eventually he worked his way up to becoming the cupbearer of the Persian emperor. The memoir begins with Nehemiah's brother Hanani showing up after having visited their homeland. And during the conversation, Hanani delivers this really sad news about the state of their homeland and especially their home city. They said to me, "Those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates have been burned with fire." When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days, I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Now, what I want you to see is Nehemiah's response when he receives the bad news, when he found out about the devastation, all the destruction, and his great disappointment. He found out that his home city, the place that was supposed to be a light on the hill, a guiding lighthouse for the raging sea of the human experience, the place that was supposed to be God's presence on earth, the place that was supposed to be showing the world what God is like, to help the world find its way back to God, that place was ruined. That place was a mess. It was destroyed by people who couldn't care less about the Israelite God, their way of life, or their home. And Nehemiah's response was to sit down and weep. In his own words, he said, "For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed." Now, I thought about parsing all of that out for you, getting into the language, talking about what it means to mourn, what it means to fast, and to pray. But you get it, right? I mean, he was so completely crushed by the news that he wept and stopped eating. His response was to lament. The word for pray here carries with it the idea of a complaint and a demand that God would do something about the horrible situation. Now, just to go ahead and ruin the end of the story for you, what eventually happens is that Nehemiah goes to the king and he requests permission to return to his homeland to help to rebuild it, to go back and figure out a fresh start, which is, well, it's something that we all get on some level, right? We get the impulse to want to do something about the disappointment, however deep it may be, to do something about what we're experiencing, to find a solution, to make a resolution, to react in some way and begin to rebuild, to move on, to figure out our own fresh start. We get that. But before we move on too quickly, I want to point out one small detail that we rush past often. For some days I mourned before God. For some days. 3 little words that are easy to miss. Do you know how many days some days is? Me neither. But have you ever been in such a rough state that you lost track of time? You forgot what day it was, or how much time had actually passed? I mean, if you've ever lost a close loved one, a family member, a friend, if you've experienced something deeply tragic that totally upended your life, you get this. It's amazing how easy it is to lose track of time, right? For some days, I mourned. I lamented. I wept before God. I cried about what happened. My guess is that Nehemiah doesn't actually remember maybe how long he lamented exactly. But his journaling does give us a clue. He starts his memoir off by saying that it was the month of Kislev. Kislev is basically like our November-ish. Now, remember, I said he does eventually go to the king and ask permission to go rebuild his home city. And in the next chapter, we find out that he makes that request in the month of Nisan, which is sort of like our March. In other words, he mourned, fasted, and prayed from sometime in November to sometime in March. For about 3 to 4 months. He lamented to God for well over 100 days. Before he did anything else. Before he rushed to rebuild, he mourned for 100 days. When I read that and discovered that length of time, I was immediately struck by how differently Nehemiah handled the hard things in life. How differently from me. His first instinct was to weep, was to lament to God about the situation. Which, to be honest, it makes sense for him. I mean, mourning and lament, they were an ingrained habit in God's people in those days. Almost a third of the Psalms in the Bible are lament psalms. That's their prayer book that gave them that lamenting language to express themselves to God that way. A third of those center on complaints to God about all of the disappointment and difficulty in life. And so as I contemplated this passage, I was kind of hit between the eyes with this question. When will you weep? Weep for your relationships, weep for your family, weep for your job. When will you weep for your community or for your friends? When will you weep for your country or for our world? When will you weep? Before you rush to respond or rebuild, before you push past the pain to try and figure out your fresh start, when will you weep? Nehemiah's first response was to lament before God. My sense is that we don't do this very well in our culture. We're fix-it people. We're reaction people. We're quick to make a statement people, choose sides people. We're quick to move on, to move in, or to move out people. But we're not really a weeping people. Not for 100 days. But this is why this is so important. If you don't take the time to weep, to lament, you will short circuit your fresh start. You'll demolish your do-over before you even get a chance to dig into it. Now, I'll give you just 2 quick examples for why that is. First of all, if you don't take the time to weep before God, you're going to leak your emotions on others, and it won't be pretty. I mean, one of the reasons that you and I live in what Ed Stetzer calls an age of outrage is because we don't personally mourn the brokenness and the damage in our lives in this world before God. When something breaks our hearts, we don't take 100 days to go before God on our knees and cry. I mean, we barely take 1 day. Instead, we vent to our spouses, or we gossip with our friends, we rage with those who share our opinion online, we fan the flames of outrage on social media, or we take to the streets, we make public statements, we assume our position, we add a lot of noise to culture. And we just leak our emotional response all over the people around us. And often in the process, we do unseen amounts of unnecessary damage. Nehemiah, it's almost counterintuitive. His first reaction was to aim his complaint at heaven. Now, one of the healthy byproducts of doing that is that he learned to trust God for justice and learned to be like him, to be slow to anger and abounding in love, which is a description that I think we all wish would be something that could describe us and our world. I mean, slow to anger and abounding in love. But if you don't take time to lament, you'll leak your emotions all over. Second, the other thing that happens when you don't take time to weep before God for some days is that you run the risk of correcting and fixing the wrong problem. When we rush to rebuild and skip lament, when we push past the pain to figure out our fresh start, we run the risk of not actually addressing what truly went wrong in the first place. I mean, it takes time to slow down and figure out what the issue really was or is. That argument you had with your coworker wasn't really about politics, it was about something deeper. Otherwise, you wouldn't have gotten so mad. Or think about that fight with your partner. It wasn't really about the dishes or some other chore. It was about respect and how you both best receive and communicate love. You see, if you don't take time to mourn for some days, you're going to miss the deeper trouble, the deeper pain, and you're going to wind up building on a faulty foundation. Your do-over will trip you up shortly after you leave the starting block. Taking time to aim your complaint at heaven first gives you time to figure out what actually went wrong. Now, does it always have to be 100 days from Kislev to Nisan? Well, no, probably not. The exact duration, I don't think the exact duration is the point. The point is being able to actually wipe the slate clean before you figure out your fresh start. Otherwise, you're going to almost certainly find yourself back in the same mess. I mean, the times that I have said and done the dumbest things in my life were usually a direct result of me skipping lament, rushing to rebuild, rushing to a solution, moving too quickly towards some fix. So friends, when will you weep? And listen, even Jesus took time to lament to his Father in heaven about the brokenness of this life. I love the story that the disciple extraordinaire Peter told the gospel writer Mark about. I love it because I think it reflects so much of our experience. Then Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre and went through Sidon, down to the Sea of Galilee and into the region of the Decapolis. There, some people brought to him a man who was deaf and could hardly talk, and they begged Jesus to place his hand on him. After he took him aside, away from the crowd, Jesus put his fingers into the man's ears, and then he spit and touched the man's tongue. I mean, this is about as abracadabra as Jesus gets, right? But I love the features of the story because the initial reading sounds so weird that they could only be a retelling of something that Peter actually saw. I mean, you could imagine Peter retelling this story being like, look, I don't know what to tell you. He stuck his fingers in the guy's ears, and then he touched his tongue, and then he spit. I don't know if it was part of the miracle or if he was just trying to communicate, I'm going to fix your hearing and your speech. I don't know. That's just what I saw, okay? But it's the next part. The next part is the part that is, I think, so relatable and instructive. Jesus looked up to heaven and with a deep sigh said, Ephphatha, which means be opened. At this, the man's ears opened and his tongue was loose and he began to speak plainly. Now, verse 34 in the original Greek is actually a little more choppy than the English. It says, looking into heaven, he sighed. But the word for sigh is stenazo, and it means to groan, like a wordless complaint or a lament. Jesus actually does it again in the next chapter of Mark when dealing with the religious leaders. But I love the image of Jesus encountering the brokenness, the pain, the frustration, the relational strain, the disappointment of this life, and just pausing to sigh. To take time first to turn to God and wordlessly aim a complaint at heaven. And the fascinating thing I think about Jesus is that after doing that, mourning, the sighing, the groaning about the brokenness of this life, he doesn't turn his back on that world. He doesn't write it all off. He doesn't condemn everyone to hell. He doesn't strike anybody dead, but instead he helps. He heals. And then he goes to the cross to seek and save. He sacrifices himself in order to pay the price to make it right, even though he never did anything wrong. And when he rose from the dead, it gave his disciples all something to hope for, that if death could actually be fixed, then why not the brokenness of life? So friends, in your deep disappointment, in your devastation, your frustrating relationships, most certainly in our age of outrage that we all want to move on from, whatever it is that you're needing a fresh start from today, take time to lament. Resist the urge to go quickly to a rebuild. Be careful not to push past the pain to figure out your fresh start. You may end up leaking your emotions all over, doing unknown damage to others unnecessarily. And you may end up missing the true cause, driving your do-over in the first place, only to be bitten by that same problem in the future. Instead, look to Jesus. Look at his life and love. When he saw our brokenness, his instinct was not to condemn, to scream, to accuse. It wasn't even to push past the pain and to move on too quickly. But it was to sigh, to aim his complaint at heaven, and then to be about the business of giving people a fresh start. So, as followers of Jesus, may we live and love like he did for us. May we, like Nehemiah, pause to lament for some days. Well, as always, thanks so much for joining us. You know, it's our mission at RedeemerOnline.church to help the physically scattered to digitally gather and grow as disciples of Jesus. And if that's something you're interested in and you haven't done so yet, we really want to encourage you to hit that subscribe button, the like button, even the notification bell, because that's going to let you know whenever we put out new videos, and it's going to let us know that you're here. And let me tell you, we're so glad that you're here. Now, up until this point in the RedeemerOnline.church adventure, we have been able to fund this project using outside grants and different organizations that are willing to think digitally about church and the best way to help people grow spiritually. But those grants are kind of running their course, and in order for us to continue to provide this content for you on a weekly basis, we really need your support. And so if you're willing, we'd love to have you participate by going to RedeemerOnline.church and clicking the Give or Donate button in the top corner, or you can just click the link below that says Donate. That's going to take you to our website giving page, and you can use your debit card or your credit card to give digitally there. And we'd really appreciate your support so that we can continue to help people grow spiritually in this digital landscape. So if this has been meaningful to you or to somebody that you love, we'd really appreciate your participation in that way. Now, when it comes to discipleship and growing spiritually, we think that happens in really three major steps. The first step is to do exactly what you're doing right now, and that's to consume content. And so every week we put out these videos, we write blog posts, or we send out an email, and just stuff that you can read, you can watch, you can consume to help you grow spiritually. But the second big step, the step that if you're just consuming, I want to encourage you to take today, is to communicate. You can do that. The easiest way is to maybe leave a comment in the comment section, or you can DM us on social media, or you can just go ahead and click that link that says join down below, and that's going to take you to our website, to the email list sign up, where we can start to get into contact with one another. You can receive our weekly email where we give out tools for how to follow Jesus in your daily life, and it'll give us an opportunity to connect so we can find out where you're at spiritually and how we can best support and help you. Now, finally, the third step is to go from communicating to contributing. And that's really where you go from loving to watch Redeemer Online to actually living Redeemer Online in your life, your everyday life, and sharing those stories. Because we think that the more people learn to live and love like Jesus, the better off our communities, our neighborhoods, our families, our workplaces, really our world would be. And we'd love to hear those stories about how you're contributing spiritual fruit to the communities in which you participate. Now, until we see each other again, I want to send you off with God's blessing. Go with the love of your Heavenly Father, the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit that binds us all together, even though we're separated all over the place. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.